Trump tax plan, why the White House says it's the biggest in U.S. history. The contraception mandate. We'll have an update from the Capitol on why the Department of Justice is not doing away with the controversial part of Obamacare. Papal TED Talk.
Quanto più le tue azioni hanno un impatto sulla gente.
The Holy Father speaks to thousands about the future you. And right time, right place. The Pope meets with two Good Samaritan New Yorkers who say helping people is in their DNA. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 26, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump proposes sweeping new tax cuts, even as Washington struggles with mounting debt. The president's overhaul would double the amount taxpayers can deduct and provide massive tax cuts to businesses, big and small. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and National Economic Director Gary Cohn unveiled the Trump administration's ambitious tax plan.
Under the Trump plan, we will have a massive tax cut for businesses and massive tax reform and simplification.
President Trump has promised big tax reform and tax reduction, but he was notably absent from today's event. The plan includes reducing the top corporate tax rate from 35% to 15%, dropping the top tax rate for individuals from 39.6% to the mid-30s, and slashing small business owners' rates from 39.6% to 15%. The plan will also include child care benefits, a proposal promoted by the president's daughter, Ivanka. Critics say the new rates would blow a hole in the budget and cause the national debt to soar by more than $1 trillion over a decade. But conservative policy expert Ryan Streeter says the tax cut for corporations will work to benefit the average American worker.
When people talk about needing to raise wages and have better jobs in this country, the people that provide wages and jobs mostly are private companies. And so by showing some favorability in the tax policy to them, you actually are fighting for the average worker.
The administration promises more specifics will come this summer. The nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation says a big cut in corporate taxes would add to long-term budget deficits. This could be a problem for Republicans. It means they would need support from Senate Democrats to pass the tax overhaul. Some religious freedom lawyers cry foul after the Department of Justice asks for a 60-day delay in a case involving the HHS contraceptive mandate. They want to know why the Trump administration didn't just drop the Obama-era fight with religious nonprofits. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has the story. Good evening, Jason.
Lauren, on the campaign trail, candidate Trump promised to protect the rights of Catholics. He blasted Hillary Clinton's support of the contraceptive mandate, which forces most employers to provide health coverage of contraception, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs, a mandate fought by religious groups, including EWTN.
The fight against the contraceptive mandate didn't end at the Supreme Court last year.
It's been 6 years since the government announced the HHS mandate, which would require religious groups like East Texas Baptist University and Houston Baptist University to violate their faith on pain of millions of dollars in fines. 6 years is long enough. It's time for the government to admit defeat.
The High Court sent the cases back to the lower courts, saying the federal government and the religious groups should come up with a compromise. But this week, the Department of Justice asks for 60 more days to work through lawsuits filed by East Texas Baptist University, the University of Dallas, Catholic Charities of Fort Worth, and the Diocese of Beaumont, Texas. Attorneys for some of the plaintiffs say the Justice Department should have just dropped the cases.
Why are they not doing what the Trump administration has promised to do? President Trump, Secretary Price, Attorney General Jeff Sessions have all made statements in favor of groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor and East Texas Baptist University. The question is, why is the Department of Justice not honoring that promise?
A conservative lobbyist tells me the Trump administration might be buying time for the president to issue an executive order which could include protections against the contraceptive mandate and other protections for religious freedom. This month, more than 50 lawmakers wrote the president, urging him to sign it.
I think broadly an important reason that he's president of the United States today is some of the promises he made on religious freedom. And so we look forward to helping that process happen. People try to paint this as an anti-LGBTQ issue when really it's a pro-religious freedom issue.
The Justice Department tells me they're not defending the HHS mandate, but they need time to sort through the complex issue. They're also waiting for several government positions to be filled, including the head of the Labor Department, which is involved in this case. Lauren?
What has the White House said about this delay, Jason?
Well, we're told President Trump supports religious liberty, and this is an absolute priority for his administration.
Jason Calvi reporting on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Department of Homeland Security launches an office for American victims of immigrant crime.
We are giving people who are victimized by illegal aliens for the first time a voice of their own. All crime is terrible, but these victims, as represented here, are unique, and they're all too often ignored.
The office will be used to keep victims informed of immigration proceedings of suspects. The president announced plans for the program during his speech to Congress in February. Critics say a ruling by a federal judge that blocks the president's order to withhold funding from sanctuary cities could be overturned.
The government could appeal this to the Ninth Circuit and say, in essence, that the judge misinterpreted and misread the executive order.
The government hasn't cut off any money yet or declared any communities sanctuary cities, but the Justice Department sent letters last week advising communities to prove they are in compliance. President Trump signs an executive order to end what he calls an egregious abuse of power.
Every day we are going to continue pushing ahead with our reform agenda to put the American people back in charge of their government and their lives.
The order calls for a review of a century-old law giving the president power to set aside lands for federal protection. The president accused the Obama administration of using the old rule to put millions of acres of land and water under strict federal control. And the president has also signed an executive order for Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to review school regulations. It's designed to return power to the local and state level. The president says the order will provide the, quote, bright and beautiful future our children deserve. As tensions rise between the United States and North Korea, U.S. senators head to the White House for an extraordinary briefing. All 100 senators were invited to meet with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary James Mattis to discuss the growing threat. The Trump administration has warned all options, including a military strike, are on the table to block North Korea from developing a nuclear missile capable of reaching the U.S. Meetings like today's are usually held at the Capitol building. In Iraq, government forces say they've made major gains in their offensive against ISIS in Mosul. A top Iraqi general says 70% of western Mosul is now liberated, and the remaining militants are completely surrounded. Troops also captured the nearby historical site of Hatra from the terror group. A Capuchin friar in Madagascar is killed protecting a deacon during a robbery. A Vatican news agency says 5 thieves broke into a friary in the middle of the night and attacked the deacon. When one of the friars heard screaming, he ran to help and was shot and killed. Police have arrested some of the suspects who wanted to steal the friary bell. The deacon had to be hospitalized, but he survived. Pope Francis warns the powerful to act humbly in a TED Talk, urging the world to show more solidarity with the poor and the weak.
Quanto più sei potente, quanto più le tue azioni hanno un impatto sulla gente, tanto più sei chiamato a essere umile.
The Holy Father delivered the videotaped talk in Vancouver on the future of you. It is the first by a pope. TED Talks are influential videos from expert speakers on education, business, science, and technology. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, the talk is called The Future of You. What is the Pope's main message?
Lauren, I think if we could sum it up in one word, it would be solidarity, bringing people together, as Pope Francis is often calling us to do, getting us off the couches, getting us to look at our neighbor and to look at their needs. And he said, hope begins with one person. It begins with you, he said. Then it begins with you, and then another person. This leads to a revolution, he said. When we become a community, it becomes a revolution, one of tenderness that thinks about solidarity, thinks about our neighbor, and doesn't put product ahead of the person.
You know, the very fact that a pope would participate in a TED Talk is news in itself. How do these initiatives come about?
The Pope, as we can imagine, receives many requests like these all year long. And it was Bruno Giussani, the international coordinator for TED, who said on the TED blog on their website that they have been trying to get this to happen for about a year. So various visits to the Vatican, visits with the Pope's advisors, and various people involved with Vatican communication. So it took about a year. But knowing Pope Francis, he's not shy. He wants to take the message of the church, the message of Christ, to the peripheries. And that means using all the means of communications available to him. This is the first time a Pope has participated in a TED Talk. We know the Pope is on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. He's everywhere because he really wants to get that message out. And he decided to use this event to spread the gospel message, really.
According to Pew Research Center, Mary, more than 70% of Americans who describe their religious affiliation as atheist, agnostic, or nothing have a very or mostly favorable view of the Pope. What does it mean that this religious leader has such a tremendous impact on non-religious folks?
I think it's this Francis effect that we keep seeing. Look at the end of the TED Talk. If you watch it at the very end, Lauren, he receives a standing ovation. These are people involved in the world of culture, people from Silicon Valley, professors, not necessarily any of them Catholic, but they stood up and they clapped because he's reaching people on a very human level, because his message is about being humble. He spoke to people of power about being humble. The greater responsibility you have, the more humble you should be. And I asked Greg Burke, the director of the Holy See Press Office, why Pope Francis chooses events like these. And he says it's a great way to get the church's message out to people who aren't necessarily believers.
He does touch all people, you're right. And I've heard from many that this Pope is their Pope and they're not Catholic. Fascinating. Mary Shevlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thanks so much for your report.
Thank you, Lauren.
The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom says the state of international religious freedom is getting worse. Christina Arriaga is a member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Most interesting to me in this new report is that Russia has been added to the list of countries of particular concern. We reported last week that they have banned Jehovah's Witnesses, and there are reportedly more than 170,000 of them in Russia and more than 8 million around the world. Why is this happening in Russia? Why now?
The Russian government has taken on draconian measures against religious freedom. In fact, we think this is the first time since post-Soviet era that these religious freedom violations have been put in place. Putin started with this supposedly anti-extremism laws, and they have been applied to the Jehovah's Witnesses, who don't even participate in government. They're pacifists. What we think at the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom is that the Jehovah's Witnesses, precisely because they don't participate in government, have become a threat to the government.
Let's move on to Iraq. I was shocked, I say, to see that Iraq is only a Tier 2 group, among others like Cuba and Afghanistan. It's been on the list since 2008. Why has Iraq sort of moved down the list? The report said religious violations are severe, but they don't meet the standard. If you look at these Tier 2 countries here, it's Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Laos, you can see them all there, Turkey, and Egypt too, where we just saw 2 bombings. How is it possible with non-state actors like the Taliban and ISIS operating there?
So Iraq, just like Egypt, and I was just in Egypt a couple of months ago, they have the same issue. They have a government that's trying to stop sectarian violence, but then they have ISIS. This is unprecedented that you have a group that transcends a country operating in both areas. So what our report judges is how the government is doing, trying to stop sectarian violence, and unfortunately, we also have a section for entities of particular concern. ISIS is one of them.
In-state actors, and it's also the Taliban, and it's also al-Shabaab, which is, I think, a lesser-known group. Let's take a look at the video that we shot in Iraq just just a week ago. The bullet holes in the cross, look at that, the graveyards that are desecrated. If this is not a violation of religious freedom, what is? I don't understand how the designation can be made that they're tier 2 just because the government is sort of trying to help out.
Undoubtedly, the human rights situation both in Egypt and in Iraq is deplorable. And all the 37 countries that are listed in the report are struggling with a lot of difficulties inside the country, and they're horrible violators of religious freedom. So we're not saying that the situation has improved. We're saying the government is making attempts to improve the situation. When we were in Egypt, it was only a few days after the December 11th bombing, but the Coptic Pope with whom we met said that it was so important that President al-Sisi had actually gone not once but twice to religious ceremonies. That had never happened before.
So I guess what we're seeing here is you have non-state actors like ISIS and you have governments that are improving. It just seems like in all of those countries that all of them should be tier 1. Thank you so much for joining us. Cristina Arriaga, member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Coming up, coping with violence in Egypt.
We are seeing now bombings of churches.
The dangers surrounding the Pope's weekend trip. And a few lucky kids get the ride of their lives. Pope Francis will celebrate Mass in Egypt this weekend before a diverse group of faiths. Orthodox Copts and other Christian churches and Muslims are expected to attend. Last week, I talked to one Middle East expert about the state of Christians in Egypt. Joining us now is Maryse Tadros, a professor at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex in England, and she's the author of Copts at the Crossroads, The Struggle for Inclusive Democracy in Egypt. Maryse, the Holy Father is visiting Egypt, and it comes at a very tense time for Christians who are being targeted by ISIS. Give us a snapshot of the situation for Christians.
So Christians have had periods of coexistence with Muslims in Egypt for a very long time, with spats of intense encroachments. And what we have seen up to 2014 and 15 is incidents of sectarian violence by local groups, sometimes torching of churches, sometimes acts of attack on individuals and homes. But what we saw is after the ousting of the Muslim Brotherhood government in 2013, Islamists, a combination of groups that supported the ousted President Morsi, started targeting Christians as a way to get back at them for participating in the Egyptian uprising against President Morsi in 2013.
It seems as if it's getting worse and worse. Is that right?
Yes, that is absolutely right. What we are now seeing is a new phase in sectarian targeting, which is of a very different nature. It's different because following ISIS's threat to the Copts, that as infidels they will be targeted, is that we are seeing now bombings of churches. We are seeing people, basically recruits of ISIS, who are willing to give their lives to cause maximum damage. So now we are entering a new phase of targeting where it's going to be bloodier and more systematic and more organized.
Sure. Christians make up about 10% of the population. What do you expect to happen? What can the government do to protect them, if anything?
The government can take a number of measures. The first of all is obviously intelligence. If there is a sharing of intelligence between the Egyptian government and other governments, bearing in mind that ISIS is a transnational organization, that would tremendously help in trying to identify where the networks are working and how they're working. Secondly is better surveillance of places, especially churches, to make sure that they're not made vulnerable. And thirdly is to address the problem of radical Islamist thinking in Egypt, and to try and find national political projects that bring all Egyptians together.
Maryse Tadros, a professor at the University of Sussex in England. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Holy Father tells pilgrims at the Vatican God will not abandon us in times of darkness.
Lui si preoccupa di noi e cammina con noi.
Pope Francis is continuing his weekly talks on Christian hope. He says the gospel leaves no doubt God's care for mankind will last until the end of the world. He encourages everyone to follow the Lord without fear. And Pope Francis was greeted by University of Michigan football coach Jim Harbaugh and his family at today's general audience. The former San Francisco 49ers coach, who is Catholic, gave the Pope a Michigan football helmet and a pair of Michigan-themed Air Jordan shoes. I'd love to see him wear those. Our Rome office asked Coach Harbaugh about the meeting.
When I met Pope Francis today, I was riding on a state of grace. That feeling was beyond description.
I'm Muslim and he defends my religion, and I look at him up to him as a hero, and he's always showing that Muslims and Christians and Catholics can combine. We're all brothers and sisters and we can coexist together.
The team trip was optional for the student athletes. They're taking tours and holding practices. Well, take a look at this. This is a fun video. You see the Pope in the Pope-mobile, but who else do you see? He gave a ride to 6 children. Now, he does this regularly, but today it was captured on camera. The crowd absolutely went crazy. Up next, a preview of a new show on EWTN highlighting miracles and a story of survival. The Pope greets a woman and the 2 Good Samaritans who saved her. EWTN debuts a new series tomorrow exploring the lives of men and women on the path to sainthood.
More than a century ago, a French nun known for her service to the poor was inspired by the writings of a holy mystic to journey to Turkey in search of the house of the Virgin Mary. Now, healing miracles are being claimed through her intercession. Is she on the path to sainthood?
Joining us now, Michael O'Neill, host of They Might Be Saints. That was your voice we heard, right?
It was, indeed.
Very good. How did you come up with the idea for this series?
Well, anybody who knows me and knows my research on miraclehunter.com knows that I love miracles, and I spend a lot of time looking at the way the church looks at these things. But believe it or not, there's only 2 places, at Lourdes and at the Consulta Romana in Rome, where they actually validate medical miracles. So I wanted to do a series where we could look at that pursuit of miracles.
Well, there are only 2 places that do it, but there are a lot of people, like the woman we just saw now, who were waiting for to have these miracles. Let's talk a little bit about the Catholic Church and the criteria for that. First, you've mentioned that it has to be lethal. The cure must be instantaneous, lasting, and complete. And this is the one that interests me so much, is that no medical treatment relating to the cure.
So, of course, the Church encourages everybody to go see their doctor for their illnesses, but when medical treatment doesn't work and people turn to the intercession of a saint, that's when the Catholic Church may validate it as being authentic.
Let's talk about the process for these criteria. How are they met? I know that there's a person called a postulator.
Postulator, and then there's a vice postulator. They collect all the reports of miracles that stream into the cause. Popular saints often have many miracles that are being claimed, but they find the best ones and submit it to Rome. And then Rome goes through this panel of 5 or 7 doctors, and they come up with an answer whether or not there's a natural explanation.
I really liked this first episode that we were seeing here, and it focuses on Sister Mary, and I told you I was going to make you say this, Sister Marie de Mandat Grancy.
That's right.
Is that right? Okay, good. A French nun who was inspired by the writings of a holy mystic to find the true house of the Virgin Mary in Turkey. How great would that be to be able to do that? She's being considered for sainthood. Tell me a little bit more about her and what we're waiting for.
Well, this is such an exciting episode to be the first one. It's a little bit of an Indiana Jones story. We have, first of all, she's a holy woman, I believe, in the sense that she was born in royalty and nobility. She was born in a castle, and she gave all that up to be a daughter of charity and serving the poor. But she got a hold of some writings of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich that talked about where to find the true house of Mary. She transferred to Turkey and set out on that path to find the house of Mary. So that's what this episode looks at.
So I like, you're the miracle hunter, you're Indiana Jones, and we're going to watch this new series on EWTN. The host, Michael O'Neill, They Might Be Saints. Thank you so much. A woman brutally beaten says it's a miracle she was saved by 2 passersby. Elizabeth Bettina Nicolosi was mugged in New York in December of last year. Johnny Lennon and Ashley Eversano live above her and heard the attack and ran to help her. The three attended Mass yesterday at the Pope's residence. They met with the Holy Father, and our Vatican correspondent Mary Shevlin talked to Elizabeth about what she hopes to gain by sharing this dramatic story.
My hope with this is it inspires other people to do something, whether it's save someone's life or just open the door and help them with a package. That 10 seconds can make a difference.
Nicolosi says the world needs more good stories of people helping, and she's glad they could all meet with Pope Francis. What a great story. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night, and God bless.